Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So I wanted to go back before moving forward. Uh, we reached to a discussion on the sunan of the salah. But one of the things that I wanted to do is make sure that before we continued on discussing the sunan of the salah, because probably when it comes to this text, the the ladder of guidance, one of the important points is that every chapter that comes before Sajda Sahu. Okay, so we have the introduction, and the introduction lays down a framework for how do we understand the action piece of the salah? How do we understand the speech piece of the salah? What are what is the salah made out of? What is it the salah composed of? Actions and words, and some things that don't fall in either of those two categories of actions and words that pertain to things of the heart, like intention. And after getting into the introduction, he deals with the conditions, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. The conditions of the salah that obligate the salah, and the conditions of the salah that have to be in place in order for the salah to be determined to be sound. Once that knowledge is set in, or once the student becomes acquainted with the fact that salah is made up of words and action, and some things that are neither of the two, that's a way is a presentation of a framework to kind of give you an understanding of what it is that you're dealing with when we talk about salah. So in order for you to be able to identify what salah is and understand how to deal with the reality of the salah, you have to have some sort of framework. And that framework, it gives you a classification system. That's why we come to the point that primarily salah is made up of words and deeds. Well, why is that important? Going back to the discussion that we were having outside of this um, session, in the first session, when logic came in to Islamic studies, the idea of conceptualizing something, the idea of conceptualization became very important, what they call tasawwur. And then if you can engage in tasawwur, or if you can engage in conceptualizing, then you come to a ruling. You come to a ruling, you come to a conclusion on that thing. Well, the same thing here is like the tools are being given to us, the framework is being given to us so that we can conceptualize what salah is. So then we can judge whether the salah is sound or invalid. So there's a systemic approach, and the philosophy that is here, right, in terms of how do you study salah. And that's why in this type of book, usually you're not going to find much discussion on evidences. in terms of detailed evidences, detailed as opposed to principles, as opposed to sources of knowledge. Detailed evidences just means that you're referencing either an ayat from the Quran or the Sunnah. When you start talking about principles and sources, now the Quran is a source of knowledge, but it's also, you know, a principle for of reference. Same thing with the Sunnah. Same thing with analogy or any of the other proofs that's used in usul al-fiqh. So we don't want to go too deep into that. But after you conceptualize this at the basic level, then that is actions and words. Then now it becomes how do we look at those actions and words? So now one of the things that comes up is that actions and words are given rulings. So those things which are obligatory, so that's where we get into the section of fara'id. The fara'id is the plural fard, which is basically wajib, or simply put in English, obligation. So we tally up the things of the salah, words and actions, those things that are other than words and actions. And so here he lists them as 15, right? And that's where we get that the first is the intention, and then takbirat al-ihram, and then the qiyam, or standing in the salah, standing in it, standing while in the salah, while you make the takbirat al-ihram, recitation of the Fatiha, and making sure that you're standing while you're reciting the Fatiha, ruku', or the partial prostration, making sure that you come up from it in sujood as well. So the sujood, then the full sujood, which is the full prostration, and then coming up from it, and then to make sure that um, make sure that you have there's a sense of evenness throughout all of the actions that you engage in within the salah. The stillness in the salah and the order of the salah and the sitting with the salam, so on and so forth. So that's the idea. So that, that's why you start getting all of the, oh, there's 15 things that are obligatory in the salah. Well, if you look at it that way, it becomes difficult. But if you look at it as we have to conceptualize what the salah is, and we have to be able to determine if it's sound or unsound. Part of that determining if it's sound or unsound, the goal there is to see if it's in line with the sunnah of the Prophet as a whole or not. Not just only a specific hadith, but the prophetic model. So then he goes from there, from the Father to the Sunan. Then a lower level of the Sunan is the Fada'il, or those virtuous acts. Then a discussion is had about what is disliked in the Salah, and then what invalidates it. Now we get to the point of, and I mentioned this before, sujood is sahu. which is how do you correct the salah if you make a mistake in it. So sujood al-sahw in the Maliki school is a little complicated. Is distinct in the Maliki school. No other school operates like this from the four schools. Uh, because there's sujood prior to the salam and there's sujood after the salam for correcting the salah. And we go into that. And so this is pretty well extended in this book. Then he comes into a discussion on witr, and then we're done after that. So when we come back to the some notes for this text, conditions for the salah, right? And I took these notes from a couple different books, but here I listed the Hashia Safti. Hashia Safti is pretty popular on the Ashmawi. One of the things that comes up in Jawahir al-Zakiyah, which is coming from the Hashia Safti. Hashia is basically another type of commentary on a text. There's the Sharh, which is kind of like a bulky commentary, and then there's the Hashia, which are like side notes, so to speak.
Footnotes.
I wouldn't say footnotes 100% because footnotes has a certain type of meaning in today's time. Um, and usually footnotes it it could work as long as you have the notion that there's not always is not always referential, that it can just be more of a clarificatory approach that's taken as well as referential, you know. And then the problem with that is that that's really in today's time called tahqiq in the Arabic language. Tahqiq is kind of what we do with footnotes, right? So
Got you.
that's the only thing with that. I mean, but footnotes is similar. It's just being precise with it, uh, so that you kind of have a little more detailed onto that. But the one of the things that I find, and this is the frustrating, and I mentioned this before, and I tried to find ways out of it, and I've been doing it quite well. And at least I judge myself has been doing quite well while doing this text, while reading through this text. Imam Ibn Khaldun mentioned it, and he and it's this is like kind of like critical Islamic studies, so to speak. And and when we start criticizing the curriculum, which is not necessarily good, but there is a frustrating point, and this is one of the reasons also why you begin to see what you see within the Salafi Dawah. In
Mm.
the Hashia goes and pretty much corrects issues that are in the Ashmawiyyah. It was through the blessing of Allah, and um, it was through the blessing of Allah and the acceptance, the blessing of Allah, that the text gained acceptance among the scholars and whatever other reasons that Allah put there. Because the reality is that it's a small text. Uh, Sheikh Abdul Bari al-Ashmawi, he's the one that wrote it. It's not a it became a good way to teach students, but it has its issues. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to find the Salah discussed in this way in a lot of the other books, to be honest with you, in the same way. It may come up, but with this level of clarity when it comes to the issue of conditions of Salah, that are conditions that are, that are conditions of obligation or conditions of soundness. Some of the way that he introduces it, and I've looked, is not always like you go to the Risala of Imam Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, and that's not how he writes the Risala. He takes a completely different approach at writing. One of the frustrating things is that in the Hashia, outside of the framework of how he's writing, is he comes to conclusions which are not conclusions that are really acceptable in the madhab. And that's why Ibn Khaldun was very critical of the traditional curriculum at times, because you have all these little books that students are reading. They contradict each other, and you have to make sense of that contradiction, right? And then you spend a lot of time on them. And then others say, well, look, that's part of the nature of knowledge. And this has been a tested road or map for gaining knowledge and scholarship. Does that make sense or no?
Not really.
Does it make sense for anyone? So basically, the Hashia comes in is correcting what's in the Ashmawi. And so that the fact that he's coming in and having to correct what's in the Ashmawi, that happens with a number of texts that they're coming in, the text is written, somebody else comes in, says, no, this is not the madhab, this is the madhab. So you end up having, like if the student learns al-Ashmawiyya, if you learn the Ashmawiyya without the Hashia, then basically you're learning something in the madhab that is not considered to be sound.
Sheikh, when we say Ashmawiya, what are we referring to? The madhab or curriculum or content?
Al-Ashmawiyya is a book. The
Oh,
Ashmawiyya is a book. It's a basic book and is the core of the ladder of guidance. The ladder of guidance is taking the Ashmawiyya and kind of expanding it out.
oh, okay. Thank you.
So in any event, the the confusing part of the whole situation, as I mentioned in the past, is that one text contradicts another text.
Mm-hmm.
And we mentioned that that's a matter of ijtihad of the scholar, but in reality, what happens is that that ijtihad or that research conclusion that that scholar comes to, can it be streamlined and considered to be the practice of the school? Or does it just stay at the level of being the the opinion and practice of one scholar by himself?
Mm-hmm. So like how to reconcile the differences?
Pretty much.
Okay.
So Because what happens in the concept of the madhab is that they try to streamline a group opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, you may have what they call the ijtihadat or the research conclusions of one individual scholar, but that's not considered the madhab. The
Right.
madhab it was considered the madhab position, I should say. It is the streamlined position. Can you have a deviation? Can you use another position? Yeah, you can. But that's just kind of like what's acceptable in research. In other words, what's what's the mainstream position in research, not the outliers.
Right.
So what's the mainstream position or what's the most acceptable position, so to speak, like let's say in the scientific community? That's kind of what you go with. Does that mean that other positions are wrong? No. But that was their attempt to kind of correct for any error. It was like the peer review type of approach that, your position is reviewed by your peers, and then what's concluded is what's concluded. See what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying?
Yeah.
Uh, and what's concluded is becomes the madhab. Does that make sense or no?
Yeah.
Is it better now or no?
Yeah.
For what about for everybody else? See, because what happens later on is the Salafis come and they say, you know what? We don't even want to deal with that. What we want to know is what the Quran and the Sunnah say. What are the strong opinions? That's it. We don't want to
Mm-hmm.
deal with any weak opinions in the madhab. We don't want to deal with all this back and forth. We want to simplify the path, and that's it. That's it.
Right.
That's eventually what happens.
Which excludes a lot of people that are in the outlier,
There are what?
that are part of that outlier that you mentioned.
Yeah. It just says, but the madhab does that anyway. The
Mm-hmm.
Salafis the Salafis didn't do anything different in that regard than what the madhab did, but what they did is they imposed their madhab or their approach on everything else and said, you know what, we're not gonna go with this back and forth stuff. Shafi said this, Hanafi said this, or within the Shafi school, there's these opinions. No, we need to just clear the way.
Yeah.
We need to clear the way, and we need to make sure everybody understands what the hadith is for this, and we're moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Which this type of approach, not the Salafi approach, this type of approach with the madhab, it does create after a while a lot of hecticness because they start fighting each other, right? And that's what happened historically. They started fighting each other, and inside the madhab, there's a lot of confusion as well, right? And those are signs of decline, not necessarily signs that the madhab approach is bad. Is the Muslims went into decline and it began to be reflected in the scholarship. So now we're tasked with just how do you benefit from all of this that has been written? How do you benefit from the knowledge, right? How do you benefit from the knowledge? So the conditions of Salah. The conditions of Salah, there are two types. That condition, which is the condition of obligation, condition sharat al wujub, right? You can say here sharat al wujub, and here is sharat al with a condition of soundness. So a condition of obligation, it means that there's certain things that are exist that are obligating you to pray. Conditions of soundness are there's certain things that have to be in place in order for the salah to be considered sound. Now, in the discussion that the scholars were having on this, The question became, what is the actual difference between the two? What's the differentiating mark between the conditions of obligation and the conditions of soundness? So that's as follows. The conditions of obligation are not your responsibility, not the responsibility of the culpable agent, the mukallif, to acquire. Like you can't make yourself become pubescent. You know, you can't make yourself stop being on a menstrual cycle, right? So there's certain things, there's certain things you can't do, right?
That goes against the principle of being mukallif.
That's a nice way to put it. It's a nice way to put it. You know what I'm saying? Certain conditions that just fall in place that obligate you. But the discussion comes up. Now let's put it this way. Let's see if we can do this. Then I think we can.
What did mukhalif mean again? Was that the level of age of maturity?
I translated it as the culpable agent, the the one that is responsible before the Sharia, that
Okay.
you acquire that you acquire rewards or you acquire misdeeds.
Okay.
But the culpable agent, I think, is good, even though it's technical. It's a good. Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Can you see the section? As for the prerequisites
Mm-hmm.
of obligation, of the obligations of the prayer, there are five. Islam, he translated this as maturity, which is bulugh. Puberty is maturity is not a bad translation, but the third is reason. The fourth is the ending of menstruation and the blood after uh, the blood that flows after birth, postpartum bleeding, postpartum bleeding, and the fifth is commencement of the time of prayer. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
now we have he listed seven for the prerequisites of the soundness of the prayer. These things have to be in place in order for the salah to be considered sound, to be in a state of purity, where you don't need to make wudu, you don't need to make ghusl, your clothes are pure, your body is pure, meaning, some like on your skin, that type of concept. Or the place of prayer as well, you know, the place that you're going to be praying and that has to be all purified, that you have the right clothes on, that's not anything complicated, that you're facing the direction of the Qibla, that the time is in for the salah, that you avoid speaking uh, that speech which is not part of the salah, and that you avoid excessive movements. That's really the bottom line with that.
Sheikh, what is the position like if there's a person who has like GI issues, like an elderly person, and every time they make wudu, like they end up breaking it, passing wind. I know I've heard like different things, but like what do you do if you're in that situation where you just cannot keep your wudu for too long?
I mean, the common position is that that person has to make wudu for every salah or every two salah, whatever it is that that person can work with as that is concerned.
Hmm.
There's other details to that as well, but that's the general position. Uh, and there's some discussion on it because of the issue of ease and hardship and all that. But so the conditions of the salah. So now we look at some of the notes that are taken. The notes that I took in relation to the book. So the conditions of obligation is not the responsibility of the culpable agent. Culpable means that you're going to catch a sin, means that you're responsible, means you're liable. Agent, it means you have the ability, right? Mukallaf, culpable agent.
Which is the way you translated it?
Yeah, that's the way that
Okay.
I've been struggling with the mukallaf concept for a long time. How do you translate it? As a responsible person, is it? So still has to have a technical meaning. So culpable agent is a person that is of age and capable, has agency. Agency means has ability. So the mukallaf to acquire, like you can't acquire intellect, you can't acquire puberty, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in the case of the conditions of soundness, the culpable agent is obligated to acquire them. Like if you need to make wudu, go get wudu. If you need to purify your body or your clothing or the place of prayer from filth, then you do that. If you need to face the qibla, then you do that, etc. So based on this characterization or this way of looking at it, uh, okay, so I said based on this characterization or definition, that which distinguishes the condition of obligation from that of soundness. That doesn't flow. Hold on a second. Based on this way of defining, right? Let me put it this way. Based on this definition, that which distinguishes the condition of the obligation from that of soundness does not allow the two terms to be joined. In other words, we can't say that this is a condition of obligation and a condition of soundness alike, or we can't say that in the case, in the case of intellect, we can't say that intellect is a condition of obligation and condition of soundness alike, because in one here we're saying, bear with me on this. Here we're saying that the culpable agent is obligated to acquire this thing. That's in the condition of soundness. In the
Right.
condition of obligation, we're saying that it's not the obligation, it's not the responsibility of the culpable agent. So that means the two terms can't be joined. Why? Because in one case, we're saying that the person is responsible for bringing that thing about or for doing it, and in the other uh, definition, we're saying no, that person is not. So they canceled each other out. Is that clear or not really?
Not really.
Not really, because if you're saying an obligation, a soundness of something negates an obligation.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
No, I know that's not what you're saying, but that's what I'm asking. Not that you're saying, but I'm saying, does it
No,
as
but
a
go,
question?
but go with what I'm saying because it's not going to make sense. As we're dealing with a technical issue.
Yeah.
Condition of obligation. By this definition, what is it? The conditions of obligations are not the responsibility of the culpable agent to acquire.
Uh huh.
Right. Like the intellect and puberty.
That's an example, right?
Mm.
You can't you can't make that happen.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. We say that. Yes,
Making
we
Okay,
said
some,
before.
it happens through the natural state of affairs. It comes about by itself. Maybe the way
Right.
I defined it is not the best way, but that's the point. Whereas in the conditions of soundness, number two, the culpable agent is obligated to acquire.
is obligated. Right. Is obligated to acquire.
So in the conditions of obligation, is you're not obligated.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your responsibility. Whereas in the conditions of soundness, it is your responsibility.
You're
But
obligated
if
to
you,
do what's within your control.
Yes, it's not.
okay, that's the best way to put it. Yeah.
So then
That
what happens is there's based on this definition here, right? Based on this definition, which kind of separates here, because we're looking at what's the differentiating mark between the conditions of obligation, conditions of soundness. The
mm-hmm.
differentiating mark or what differentiates between those two realities, they're both conditions, is that one you're responsible for, the other one you're not responsible for. Plain English.
Yes.
Okay, but based on this definition, that which distinguishes the condition of obligation from that of soundness, which is what? What distinguishes?
What's what? What's the question?
What distinguishes the condition of obligation from the condition of soundness?
One that's within your control and one
Right.
that's
So based on that definition, that which distinguishes the two is what you have control over, what you don't have control over, right?
mm-hmm.
That that distinguishing point, it doesn't allow us to join together the conditions of obligation and the conditions of soundness. We can't join the two together. Why? Because I have control over one, I don't have control over the other.
But one precedes the other.
That's not the point, but can we bring them together? Together at the same time. By this definition, we can't.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the earlier scholars, they had this definition, this style of definition for dealing with what is the condition of obligation, what is the condition of soundness.
So basically, you're saying it's impossible. Like in the case of a menstruating woman, it doesn't matter if she makes wudu. If she's menstruating, it doesn't matter if she made wudu because she's menstruating, so technically her wudu is not valid because she's in a state of impurity and she can't change that with wudu.
Yeah, I mean, for right now, if that's the way that you can understand it, we'll leave it there. And that opens up the door for another series of discussions. But so here he says that the later day scholars, in the case of later day scholars, the condition of obligation is that with which is that with which is necessary, that which is necessary to perform, and the condition of soundness is that which is required in order for an act to be deemed as correct. In this characterization, the two terms
Can come
can
together.
come together. Yes,
Hmm. Where is Brother Resto?
he had to go.
Okay.
Understand the concepts. See,
Hmm.
this is, in this characterization here, the definition creates a problem for us when it comes to looking at the Salah. And that is that, remember initially I was telling you when we were having the discussion, I was saying like there's an issue here because when it comes to Islam, how can it be a condition of obligation if there's no dawah?
Right.
What's a condition of obligation? It's not your responsibility.
Right.
It's something outside of your control.
Which makes me like always question when people die and they weren't Muslim, but they never knew about the deen. Like, is that automatic hellfire? Because they
Uh,
didn't know about the deen.
for some, they have that in their mindset, but if there was never Baluga da'wah, then the person is considered technically from Ahl al-Fitra, which is the period that exists between two prophets. So then they're left to the judgment of Allah in the hereafter.
That's the functionality of prophets. That's why Allah sent prophets.
Yeah, the prophets come and they bring taklif. Taklif is what the mukallaf, they bring their obligation. But here, what you see, people, is how logic comes in and the whole science of creating definitions, how it can create issues, right?
Hmm.
And so the later day scholars, they came and they worked that problem out. You see,
MashaAllah.
this same type of situation occurs, like for instance, what we were talking about Akida issues.
Yes.
Why is it that one generation may clash with the other generation? Is it always bid'ah? It's not always bid'ah. Could be a knowledge issue, yes, circumstances and so on and so forth. But in any event, so now we get into the conditions of obligation that there are five in number. Islam. So Turkey, he says, no, the relied upon position is that it's only a condition of soundness, not a condition of obligation, as in the Ashmawiyya, which is the basis of our text, the ladder of guidance, right? These are notes for our reading. The categorizing of this, of Islam, the categorizing of Islam under the conditions of obligations is considered a weak opinion. It's considered a weak position. The relied upon position in the madhab is that the non-Muslim is responsible before the Sharia in the foundations and details. That's that's a discussion in and of itself. But
MashaAllah.
this is unique in the Maliki school. In the Maliki school, everybody's obligated to follow Islam. That's how, in terms of Aqidah and practice. That's and they use the 43rd ayah of Surah Al-Mudaththir, right? And the 43rd ayah of Surah Al-Mudaththir, part of it is Lam nakum min al-musallin, is a dialogue that the uh, disbelievers are having in the hereafter, when basically stating why it is that they're there.
But then how does that reconcile with the jizya? Didn't certain people pay a jizya for practicing their religion if they weren't Muslim?
That's a different reality because you're talking about the here and now. Here, we're talking about the state of the non-Muslim in the hereafter with regard to the salah itself. Is it an obligation on them? قالوا لم نكن من المصلين. They said we were not among the people who offered the salah. We did not pray.
Sheikh, استأذنك, I gotta go. I got a student, okay?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
So for me, like we stopped here before, this whole section still has a lot of questions under it, with regard to how we categorize, when we talk about Islam as being a condition of obligation. And so Sheikh Turki, he says no, that this is weak, is actually a condition of the soundness of the salah. And the proof of that, that some use, that is a condition of obligation, which is a relied upon position in the madhab, is that the non-Muslim is responsible before the Sharia in foundations and details, and more specifically the ayah of the Quran, which characterizes the non-Muslim as being obligated to salah.
And when we say salah, are we talking about like the Muslim prayer or just
We're
prayer?
talking about salah here, salah.
Like they should know Al-Fatiha, they should know like the way the Muslims pray in Arabic. Or should they just establish prayer?
We're talking about the salah as we know it. Not all the scholars agreed with this concept. That's why I said it's unique in the Maliki.
Okay.
Unique in the Maliki school. Not all the scholars agree that the non-Muslim is responsible before the Sharia in Aqidah and in practice. Let's put it that way. In Aqidah and practice. They didn't all agree with that. And so thus we're left with this, that the relied upon position in the madhab is that Islam is a condition for the soundness of the salah, not a condition of his obligation. as far as buluk or maturity, the capacity that transitions is the buluk is the capacity. Buluk is the capacity that transitions the person from childhood into adulthood. Now, they understood capacity to kind of be like a power within you, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And here we're talking about biological capacity. Right. That's what we probably should put here to be a little more biological capacity. So the growth of thick, dark hair, not light, thin hair, not peach fuzz, and what we understand to be peach fuzz, is one of the six signs of that Balug has entered the state of Balug is a real state for that person now. Excretion of seminal fluid, which this is not easy to unless the child says I had a wet dream or something like that.
Right.
But this is a marker. Number one is a clear marker. Number three is a clear marker, armpit odor. Number four is a clear marker. Number five, I thought to be interesting because there's truth to that. When your child matures, you see the change of the nose,
Mm-hmm.
which nobody really talks about that. And I found that to be very interesting. Number six, the age of reaching the age of 18. We have kind of stuff like that in the legal system. Some scholars stated 17 years of age. If you can't see any of these markers, then you fall back on six. If you have all of these things in place plus six, then you know for sure that the person is in a state of maturity. Now, we mentioned this before, mentioned again. The male and the female both share in these signs, except that in the case of females, they are distinct by the onset of menstruation and pregnancy.
Sheikh, what happens when a woman gets to menopause where she's not menstruating anymore? Is there any conditions, or is it just like you just pray the obligatory prayers
Yeah,
with no?
that has its own set of rulings in it,
Okay.
but it stays as is, and she continues to pray.
Okay.
The,
Without any,
the,
there's really no.
the minor is credited. One point is to be noted here that the minor being the as-saghir or the minor as we know minor is rewarded for good deeds and is not credited for bad deeds. This is based on a sound hadith with some support from other hadith that are sound as well of Ibn Abbas. The scholars derived the idea, which is something that's interesting because we never really think about it too much. So children get reward for their deeds,
Mm,
but they don't get punishment. So then when we talk about being a mukallaf, that's where you start to acquire bad deeds.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
it comes back to like the soundness of their intellect.
Well, no, I mean when they reach maturity.
Right, but they're not held accountable for their bad deeds. Why? Because they don't have the ability to think through their choices. Like we know a child's brain is not fully developed yet.
But you have some children. The only reason I kind of hesitated on that are extremely bright, but they may not reach puberty. They know right from wrong at a very basic level, not just intellect. Because uh, the reality is that lack of intellect in some cases, like in the case of the insane person, then that person is excused, or an unconscious person in a coma, so to speak, light or heavy, unconscious state of unconsciousness. A person is excused from establishing the salah in this case, or a sleeping person, but they're not awake to even be conscious of what's going on. So intellect by itself is not the marker, because here the salir is getting rewarded for the good deeds that they do,
Mhm.
but they're not at the age of accountability overall, because they're not considered an adult, a young adult.
Okay.
So, your point has validity, but to complete it, the responsible person is a young adult. Even here is how they're characterized is that there's certain biological changes which have ensued, which have come about, marking an actual transition from childhood into adulthood. Right? They're the young, but they're still a young adult, but there's an actual transition.
Yeah.
Now, some things that we know for sure because we have deeper studies in it at this point in time, like what you would like the maturation of the brain and all that. That discussion didn't take place in the past. But still, even with all that, to be honest with you, it doesn't make sense to me too much to have that type of discussion in terms of this society, because we know certain things about the brain, and still we expose these children to things which open them up to their own destruction.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So the so-called science, it doesn't match where we want the children to be at virtualized or morally or legally even.
No, it doesn't.
So the science says one thing, but the reality of life is somewhere else. Whereas here we're talking about the child himself or herself, the stages of development that child has when it gets to this point where we see these markers, these signs in place, then that child, we consider that child to be responsible.
Mm.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we're going with a standard that it could be somewhat universalized, and
I
then we
guess
make the exception.
timeless.
Then we make the exception to the rule. Yeah. But as far as the conditions of obligation, so our intellect has its own place. And intellect and bulug are not 100% mixed together. That's why when we talk about the six signs, these are mostly biological signs. Intellect is given its own classification. Where, to be honest with you, we have to ask the question here, uh, in the contemporary age, when it comes to brain development, can we add another category here for the signs of bulug
Mhm.
with regard to the brain? Who knows? That's a discussion in and of itself. But here they have intellect as a separate category, and really it's a state of consciousness. And this comes up in forensic psychology. Uh,
Right.
it comes up from the angle of
Intent.
no, not intent, capacity.
Mm.
Capacity. I'm thinking capacity. I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm thinking capacity and forensic psychiatry. There's a piece that's done on it, and this is important because say if a person is going through mental health issues,
Mhm.
are they held accountable or not? Here,
Right.
here we're just talking about Salah, the conditions of obligation of Salah. But in this case, there is a study that is there, and it's interesting. It's done by a Muslim, forensic psychiatry. It's published
Oh.
triple IT, because there's something that's called ahliya. Basically, we say, legal capacity,
Right.
and that ahliya, it entitles a person to rights, different kinds of rights. So there's full ahliya or full capacity or partial capacity. Like a baby may have partial capacity. So there's a discussion on that issue about mental state and
Yeah.
capacity.
That's what I'm going through now with one of my cases is I'm trying to figure out if this boy that I'm working with actually has empathy and remorse because it's so difficult to understand his psychology, and when he's at home he chokes his siblings to the point that they've almost died, but then he'll say sorry, but we're not sure if he actually possesses empathy or not, like if he actually possesses empathy or guilt, or if he's just habitually, like, you know what I'm saying, like we don't know if he's doing it on purpose or not.
But see, here is not getting into that level. Here is just getting into what's the minimal that's necessary to be in place in order to say that the salah is an obligation.
Mhm.
So intellect is classified by Turkey as a condition of obligation and soundness alike. intellect has to be in place in order for us to say that the salah is an obligation, and in order for us to say that salah is sound. This is contrary to what we were finding in the Ashmawiya. Uh, and I wanted to bring these things up like this as a side note for our studies, that conditions can be joined together. And that's what you find the later day scholars, they go and they correct the work of the earlier scholars in this regard. And they kind of work through this idea of defining what are conditions of obligation, conditions of soundness, and it allows the fiqh to go a little more smooth because of that. Because now they can say that salah is a condition of obligation and soundness. Whereas when in the case of Islam, for the most part, you find most of them are considered uh, like Islam is the only one really that you see there's a condition of soundness. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And this one really, bulugh is condition of soundness and obligation as well, but that was not spoken about. Time as well as a condition of obligation and soundness. So that's why I was saying that sometimes what happens with the smaller books, maybe I was complicating it a little bit, but what happens with the smaller books sometimes is confusion,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why it's necessary to like go through them properly to come to a solid position. That's why people just teaching a traditional text is a mess
Mm-hmm.
because like these types of issues that come up like this where there's contradictions between the books, they don't know how to reconcile them unless they went deep into the knowledge or unless they're doing research or they took it from their teachers like that and understanding these problems that come up in these texts. But entry of time, no doubt, is a condition of the obligation of the salah, meaning that the salah, in order for it to be an obligation on you, time has to be there, and
Mm-hmm.
you have to pray on time or within the time in order for it to be sound. Now, there's an exception to that rule. What is the exception to that rule with regard to time and salah?
If you're traveling,
Yeah,
if you're sleeping,
if you're traveling, not if you're sleeping. Yeah, yeah,
okay.
but yeah, if you're sleeping too, you can say because even though that's not mentioned, because when you wake up, that becomes the time. Or also, if you forget and then you remember, right? Then the salah becomes an obligation. Ibn Kabab in his Sharh of Qadi Iyad's Qawaid. Qawaid is a book or the I'm trying to think about how it is that they translated Qadi Iyad's book. Foundations, they called it. Foundations of Islam. And really, basically, the pillars of Islam, right? The Qawaid of Islam, that book, which is part of the curriculum in the Shokani Institute, Ibn Khabbab he's the only one that has survived, the only one that we know whose work survived to explain this book. This book is not explained by many people. And Qadi Iyad is an important scholar because he's a scholar of hadith as well. And he's a Qadi, which means that he reached the level of being a judge. He related the position of Ibn Rushd, Imam Ibn Rushd, not the Ibn Rushd from the Ibn Rushd al-Jad,
Mm-hmm.
the grandfather, not the Ibn Rushd who wrote Bidayat al-Mujtahid. He transmitted his position, but he said overall, look, it can't be conceived that the scholars will differ over this issue that uh, time for prayer, you know, uh, once it's in, it's a condition for the obligations, or it has to, or time has to be in order for salah to be an obligation. Say in this issue, nobody's going to differ over. You know,
Right.
and it says it's not conceivable that there's a difference between the Muslims stating clearly that salah is not an obligation before the entry of the time. The only thing that changes this around is like what we said, is traveling. Now, this is an interesting point, right? And this came up as well. That what is an obligation? What is an obligation is that what is an obligation outside of the time? Say, for instance, right now it's not the time of Dhuhr in the time zones that we're in. So, what's an obligation upon us in this moment? To believe that if the time of the Salah came in, that is obligatory to pray.
Mm-hmm.
To have that belief. You see what I'm saying? That's what they considered to be important.
And um, there's people that like kind of sit or do dhikr like in between. They're like waiting for the next salah to
But
come in.
but in their waiting, they have that belief that the Salah is an obligation, that they're waiting. And that's why, for instance, that's based on hadith, the waiting for the Salah.
Is that what we refer to as the ribat?
Not necessarily sitting and making dhikr, but just to kind of that's the hadith for ذَلِكُمُ الرِّبَاطِ. Uh is to be in that state, which is a beautiful reminder, actually, by the way, especially in this environment. Because here, look at what he says, but look at what's said in the Fiqh al-Maliki and its evidences, that the condition of is a entry of the time is classified as a condition of obligation and soundness together or alike, right? It's both an obligation, a condition of obligation, condition of soundness, meaning that the entry of time, it obligates us to pray, and also this time has to be in order for the salah to be sound if we pray in that time period. It's a collective obligation, meaning that if some of us know about the time, others of us are excused from knowing the time because they inform us, right? They inform us about the time. Today's time, yes, in today's era, or the the time period that we live in, we may say, well, we have calendars and we have clocks. Okay, yes, that, but still, that had to be developed. So some of us developed that technology to tell us when the time is in. Okay. In any event, here it says it's allowable to do taqleed of the muaddin, right? And that's based on the hadith of Abu Huraira. It's allowable for us to follow someone in this regard. The muaddin then becomes responsible for knowing the times of the prayer and becomes like the apps that we have on our phones, so to speak. Although with the apps, you have to be careful sometimes because they may not be always on point.
Mm-hmm.
But in any event, we're alleviated of the responsibility of everyone knowing it, but we have to be everyone searching for the time, I should say. But we have to be uh conscious, of the time. And the muaddin makes us conscious of the time. So the muaddin, this is in theory because most of us are not listening to the adhan coming from a muaddin on a regular basis.
Right.
But the idea is that the muaddin makes us aware. So we're waiting and on the look for the adhan. That's the ribat. We're waiting for one salah to come in and another salah to come in after that. We're waiting. We have that awareness. And the Shafi'i school they made this into like a principle where within every short period of time within the salah, you have to make the intention to pray.
Right.
Yeah, and that's kind of their way of following the hadith. It keeps you centered, so to speak, which is a good reminder. It's a beautiful reminder. But
Yeah.
salah, we can become, you know, dysfunctional, in it again because there's no adhan and so on and so forth. But in any event, it's classified in the madhab as a condition of obligation and soundness alike. And what's out of our control here is that we don't dictate when the time of salah comes in, but we have control over what? Praying in the right time. You see,
Mm-hmm.
you see how in changing the definition a little, the scholars were able to classify the action better. And they were able to classify this as both a condition of obligation and a condition of soundness, right? Without there being a contradiction between the two. You see that?
So we don't have control over when the salah comes in, but we have control whether we pray it on time,
Pray in the right time, even.
pray on the right time.
Yeah, and pray on time. In the Maliki school, there's a distinct, uh, this classification is unique as well. And that time is classified as ikhtiyari and dururi. Ikhtiyar has to do with khiyar or your choice. And what it means is that there's a time frame within which the culpable agent or the mukallaf, you have the choice to offer the prayer in any time of choosing, any time of choosing uh, during the designated time period. So you can pray in the beginning, middle, or towards the end.
Right.
When the durudi kicks in, the durudi means you're obligated now, is no longer your choice.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you're forbidden now from delaying the prayer, right? Uh, except that there's there's a dispensation, or except those who possess a Sharia excuse, like those that are traveling or something, or those that have to go to the bathroom or something like that. But still, there's some question. Now, in the Maliki school, they start looking at, which it can become a little frustrating for us living in the modern world, which we may have to play with the time a little bit because of work obligations and all this type of stuff that comes up. But they start associating reward and punishment with this stuff.
Mm.
And that's because they want you to be in that state of ribat. Like I already said, that the Shafi'i school has their way of achieving the practice of the hadith is that if the beginning of the time of the salah comes in, you don't pray, which that's the most optimal time to pray in, uh, unless you're in a group, unless you're praying in a jama'ah, which then the most optimal time to pray in is when the jama'ah prays. But if you don't pray within those time frames, the beginning of the salah, or when the jama'ah designates, you have to keep making the intention to pray. In the Maliki school, the idea is that you're conscious, okay, within the frame of time that's called dhuhr, that there's a part of that which you have the choice to offer the prayer in any of the time periods of thought, and there's a part of that where you just have to pray. You can't delay anymore. You're forbidden from delaying. It has to be done.
Yeah, because there's times where, like, we're not allowed to pray, right? Like when it's shuruk.
Well, that's misunderstood. When it comes to the obligatory prayer, You can pray at any time.
Okay.
You can make it up. You can pray at any time.
Even if the sun is in the midst of rising or setting?
Yeah, that applies to the sunan for
Okay.
most part. Yes. There's some detail in that within the Shafi school, but that's not, within the Maliki school and the Hanafi school, they are alike in that regard. There's no salah offered during those times. The rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, and when the sun is at its zenith point, right before Dhuhr.
But if you're trying to do your obligatory prayer and the time's running out and it's
The
reaching
obligatory prayer can be prayed anytime. Uh,
okay.
it, that is designated. If not, then it ends up becoming a makeup prayer. So that's what we call qada, and the qada can be made up at any time as well.
Okay.
Okay, so then the prayer time also breaks up into two types. Adat, which is the time of performance, the desired time of performance, so to speak, where you should normally do it. So then that's you're doing prayer as is normally legislated, and we call that adat, right? And if not, then we call it qada. And qada means basically that you're making it up.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? The way they
Yeah,
classify the time, huh?
yeah. I'm just thinking like if you miss a prayer, let's say you fell asleep during Asr and you wake up, it's Maghrib time. Like, do
Okay,
you?
so then that's qada. It's still qada for you. It's not qada.
But like, which one do you pray first, the qada or the
No, it's
obligatory?
not qada. It's not qada because at that time you were sleeping, so you were excused.
But would you make up the Asr or the Maghrib if Maghrib came in and you still haven't prayed
Yeah,
Asr?
but we're having two different conversations. You're asking about the prayer itself, and
Mm,
I'm saying I'm talking to you about the prayer time. How do we classify it? So
yes.
for Asr, if you fell asleep, you woke up at Maghrib, you didn't pray Asr. Do we classify that prayer to be within the Adha time or in the Qadha time?
Adha.
It would seem that it would be Qadha, but in reality is Adha because you were not Adat, sorry, Adat, because,
Mm-hmm.
because you were not conscious. You see
Right.
what I'm saying? So then you pray at that time. It's not a make-up prayer. It's prayer is a prayer prayed, within the time frame that is due because you just woke up.
Right.
Now, if you delayed it and it went into Isha, that's a different issue now. Now you starting to talk about qada time
Mm-hmm.
for that prayer. But if you were not asleep, if you were not asleep and you missed the Salat al Asr, if you were not asleep and you missed Salat al Asr and Maghrib came in, which one is it? Ada or qada?
Qada.
Yeah. So lastly is bulugh al-da'wah as a it's a condition of obligation and soundness of life, right? And that is that the person that grows up in an isolated area, I'm sorry, that it, in the case of the person that grows up in an isolated area and without coming into contact with the message of prophethood, you know, they are given an excuse. There's debates on that. But in any event, what this means is that the knowledge of the deen has come to you. The prophethood has come to you. So is a condition of the salah being an obligation on you and the salah being sound, basically as you became Muslim. Here, the reason why they have this debate here in reality is because the Maliki school, this is a weird point of investigation. Because in the Maliki school, technically speaking, this is where the Ashmawiya has a point, even though Turkey and others classified it as weak. And that is because in the Maliki school, they consider that everybody's responsible. That's
Mhm.
why, they don't see the non-Muslims as they see the non-Muslims as being obligated to Islam, to have the right aqidah and to have the right practice. In the Maliki school, that's how it's looked at, and they have their own proofs for that. But in the majority position, majority here means all the madhab that are popular today from the Sunni schools. Then it's a condition it would be necessary in order for a person to be Muslim to be obligated. So it'll fall back on this rely upon position conditions on. But in the Maliki school in general, they have it as a condition of obligation. I don't know if I'm being clear on that or not.
Yeah.
This section needs to be reworked so that a reader who's reading it can understand this clearly, without explanation, verbal explanation. But
So did you take the book and re just kind of revamp it to make it more
well,
understandable?
what I did was that's why I said that these are notes, but this is not only coming from here from the letter
Mhm.
from Hashia, is not only coming from the Hashia, is also coming from uh, the Sharh Qawaid, is also coming from Taysir Ashmawiya, which is a book published by Al Azhar. Uh, so I took some notes from some other books and joined them together on the same system that we're using in you see that here when we talk about the conditions for obligation, there's no definition on what a condition for here he talks about as prerequisites. And we had a discussion on this multiple times throughout this class on that translation. But the conditions, and we said that can work. Conditions of obligation, the prerequisite, it doesn't define what it is. The original author and the translator didn't put a note as well. So that was the first difference between our notes and what's in the text. Is
Mhm.
that we engaged a discussion as to what's the difference between the conditions of obligation here, translated as prerequisites, and the conditions of soundness. We also went through a classification of each of these. Do they does each one of these things fall under prerequisites of obligation and prerequisites or conditions of soundness alike, or no? Majority of these did, uh, with the exception of Islam. And this here is labeled under condition of soundness and obligation alike, which is the ending on menstrual cycle and the postpartum bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because in reality, the woman is not the woman does not have control over that.
Right.
And at the same time, is necessary in order for uh, is necessary to be in place in order for the salah to be considered to be sound, right? From here, when we look at the prerequisites of soundness of the prayer, purification. This 1 and 2 is about purification. So he listed it in this book, it's listed as being under the condition of soundness and condition of obligation alike, but it's not identified as such. It's not labeled. He doesn't tell you that he's bringing the two together under that categorization. He's not categorizing it as condition of soundness, condition of obligation, condition of soundness in a clear way.
Right.
It's
So you
there.
were able to find it in another book, or did you just break it down?
Oh, that was there, and I took it from Softy,
Okay.
Sheikh Softy, right?
Yeah, I like the way you broke it down. It definitely helps like get it ingrained
Here,
and to be
the
able to.
Arabic, here in the Arabic, it mentions something that's missing. Uh, so here it says that he took from the Mudawwana, he took from Mukhtasar Khalil, he took from Tawdih, he took from Mukhtasar ibn Hajab, the Akhdari, to build this book out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's kind of what that's the claim of Sidi Muhammad that he took. I read the law he took from those texts. It goes right here. He says that Sheikh Uthman bin Sa'q, may Allah Ta'ala be merciful to him, he transmitted the most prominent opinions of the fathers of Malik regarding the fiqh of the Salah. In it, he cited the teachings of the most important of the companions of Malik, such as Abu Abdullah Abdurrahman bin al-Qasim, who's the author of the Mudawwana, Abu Abdullah bin Ibn Abdul Hakim, Sheikh Uthman Umar al-Kurdi, known as Ibn Hajib, from his Mukhtasar, and Khalil Mukhtasar Khalil as well, from the Tawdih, and from the Akhdari. And from Sheikh Abdul Baqi Zurqani, Mukhtasar Khalil bin Ishaq. What the irony that I find in that though is this point here. You see this classification here like that is a condition of obligation signed the select. It that was there in the smaller text because this text is considered like ibtidaiya. This is like elementary school level.
Mhm.
See, so this and that type of classification, this is like all the way in the beginning of your studies.
Yeah.
It's not even middle school. Okay, so this type of organizational structure, it gives us a good insight. It's just much more clear,
Yeah.
in terms of the madhab. This has to be added to that book, but in like what Resto says in a footnote style,
Mhm.
has to be added. Resto was the one that made that comment, right? Not Abu Anis.
Yep.
Yeah, so it has to be added in footnote style to the Sulam. I think the Sulam itself probably needs to be reorganized
Yeah.
in a very clear way with like kind of like emboldened titles and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
It's a nice work though. The introduction is extremely important. The introduction that we covered is extremely important because it gives you a framework to understand the Salah. I mean, I've mentioned that a couple times today. But with that, I'm not going back to this section anymore.
Okay.
You know, we're through with that section, and I'm going to continue to move forward. Um, I'm going to continue to move forward with the fadail of the Salah now. When we finish the fadail of the Salah, then we'll go back to the obligations in the Sunan and the fadail. We'll review all those three together. We just because right now we're just kind of getting the conceptualization of it.
Yeah.
And then so we like today we went back to the beginning to kind of clear up the first part, which is the conditions of the salah. And so then we'll try to go in a little more detail about, especially when it comes to the points of obligation in the salah. I'm sorry, the points of sunnah in the salah, because the tricky part in the Maliki madhab is that sajdu sahu cover, like if you miss a sunan,
Mhm.
then sajda sahu is kicks in, right? Now, where's the tricky point at is that a lot of people think sajda sahu by itself is able to correct the salah in any case. No, that's only
Right.
in the case of the sunan. But if you miss fard, if you miss one of the fara'id, you have to perform that fard and make sajda sahu. See the difference?
Mhm.
If you miss a fard, sajda sahu by itself is not going to correct the salah so that it is sound. You have to perform the fard along with sajda sahu because you either added to the salah or you took away from it.
Right.
You either made an extra rak'ah or you forgot a rak'ah. So if you forgot an action, then your salah still requires you to perform that action that you forgot, and sajda sahu is just there as a corrective. It really sajda sahu is a mercy from Allah because that means that the whole action of worship, the whole act of worship, we should say, in this case, the salah is not just thrown out. You just correct the part where you made a mistake. Does that make sense or no? Sajda sahu, the
I
two,
got a question.
huh?
Sorry. I got a question. Sorry to interrupt you. Okay, the way I learned Sajda Saho, right, is right. Let's say I missed a raka, right, and so I still finish off the prayer. I salam out and come right back up as I'm starting the prayer back up with two rakas to fix everything that I've done. Is that the way? Is that the correct way?
There's more than one way to pray to do sajda sahu. But sajda sahu, one of the things that people they confuse is they think that, say, for instance, when it comes to the fara'id, when it comes to the obligations of the salah, you cannot have a sound salah if you missed one of the obligatory parts of it. Sajda sahu is not going to cover you on that by itself. You still have to perform that action that you missed with sajda sahu. You get what I'm saying or no? Say there's 4 rakats in Dhuhr.
Mm-hmm.
That has to be done. You have to do rak'ah number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. The rak'ah is made up of different parts, right?
Yeah.
A rak'ah is made up of different parts. Is it or is it not?
Yes.
Why do you sound confused? And Resto is there not saying anything.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm just like sometimes it's hard for me to press this button real quickly on my phone. But yeah, I do. It is made up of different parts.
So there's different actions in the salah, and they're categorized in different ways. Some things are an obligation, some things are a sunnah. Just to keep it as simple as that. I don't want to get into any more confusion.
Got you.
This rak'ah as a whole, in order for it to be considered rak'ah, you have to do step 1, step 2, step 3. As an example, step 1, step 2, step 3. If you miss step 2, your rak'ah is not complete. If your rak'ah is not complete, that means you only did 3 rak'ah. So somewhere along the line, you're going to have to make up for it in order for this to be considered salat al-zuhr.
Mm-hmm.
Sajda sahu says, hey buddy, you can fix this. You can fix your dhuhr, but you have to make sure that you correct the rak'ah. How do you correct the rak'ah? Well, you can't correct this now. You have to come with a complete new rak'ah. We'll add this rak'ah, this new rak'ah that because you missed when you were going to do 4, you missed step 2, which maybe was ruku'. You missed a ruku' in that. So you didn't give us a complete rak'ah. So you're going to be allowed to complete 1 rak'ah, and then you come with sajda sahu at the end, and we can add it on to the 4, and we complete your salah.
So you're gonna correct it before
Forget
you.
about the before, after. Don't get into the time issue right now.
Okay.
I just want you to associate sajda sahu with when you miss a fard action, sajda sahu by itself will not correct the salah. You have to do whatever it is that you're supposed to do in that rak'ah. You have to have a complete rak'ah. Then you do sajda sahu along with it. In the case of the sunnah, if you miss a sunnah by itself, sajda sahu by itself will cover it.
Okay.
So, in other words, what you're trying to say is that everything has to be complete, even if we missed whatever raka, whatever, let's say whatever ruka, whatever, then at the end, the sajda sahu would fix anything that we missed because now we're going back into there and saying, hey, I made this mistake, I gotta fix it, here's my correction
In the case of the obligatory actions of the salah and the fard.
on the
Right.
far.
Right.
Okay, got you.
It's a
In the case of the sunan, that's why I don't want to go, because in Maliki school we have fada'il and all that. But in the case of the sunnahs of the salah, if you miss one, sajda sahu by itself will cover it.
okay. But if you miss an obligation, you have to repeat the obligation and do sajda sahu.
Yeah, you don't have to complete the whole salah over again.
Just
Just
the
the
part that you missed.
huh?
Just the part that you left
Just
out.
the part that he left out. Yeah.
All right, so I get what you're saying, but I need to not see it, but more how would you say it? I need more something like more of a detail, like you know what I mean? Like, hey, this is let's just say
But
Fajr and
look
then
at look
rocket
look
one
at
two, rocket
look
two
at
three.
I gave you a visual. I was showing you
Right,
my hand. So 4 rak'ah is dhuhr as an example.
right,
So you have dhuhr. This is 1 rak'ah, this is 2 rak'ahs, this is 3 rak'ahs, this is 4 rak'ahs. Okay? And I mentioned to you 1 rak'ah is made up of multiple parts. In order for you to have 1 rak'ah, you have to do, as an example, step 1, step 2, step 3. As an example, if you miss one of these 3 steps, that means now you don't have a full rak'ah. Are you with me?
yes,
So that means now your salah is deficient. You only have 3 rak'ahs in place. Sajda
okay, I got
Sahwi
that.
says you can fix it. You do the rak'ah over again, or you do the rak'ah over again, then you make Sajda Sahwi. Right?
I got you, I got you, I
Now
got you.
you
Now I
complete the 4 rak'ah. You have a complete 4 rak'ah. And Sajda Sahwi, it complemented or it got rid of the deficiency and that's now is acceptable.
so let
Or
me
now
give
is
you
I
what
should say, hold on a second. Now is
go ahead.
sound, not
Okay,
accept. Now is considered sound. Let's not use the word acceptable and sound together. We'll talk about that next class. But
Mm-hmm.
all right.
so you get
So
what I'm
so
saying, huh?
I think I get what you're saying. So let me just respit what you said to me, what I think you said.
Okay.
So you're saying, all right, we got the four rakas is raw. I missed something on one of the movements, right? So I go back, I finish everything, right? But then I redo that raka, which gives me now, I'm just putting it in numbers. It gives me five movements now, and then the Sajda Saha, and it fixed it because now I went back, cleaned up what I had to do, fixed it, and it made it now acceptable.
It's not 5. You just adding back. It was you were supposed to give 4. You only gave 3. So now you're gonna add 1. 3 plus 1 is 4.
Right. What I'm saying is like if we do the whole four rakas like he said, right? He said do the whole four, even though you messed up on the one, right? And then all of a sudden you got to come back up and reinitiate the movement that you missed or messed up, right? And then do the sajda saha, and now it's complete. Now it's not only complete, but now it's more acceptable. Is my understanding there? Hold on. Oh man.
I think you should draw it out.
Hold on a second. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I'm sorry about that. My I don't know what's up on my phone, man. It goes back and forth with this whole situation. But was my understanding somewhat clear, or am I still off?
Say it again.
All right. So I'm under the understanding right now that once we start the prayer, I get the four rakas, right? Four rakas. On one of the rakas, I messed something up, right? I messed something up or I forgot something. So what I do is towards the end, I finish
Something
everything.
that keep it something that's obligatory.
That's obligatory. Let's okay, yeah, I got what you're saying. Something that's obligatory. So once the obligatory part is now, like once we get to the four, and then I go back and do the part that I missed, and then the sajda saha. Now my prayer is now acceptable. Is
Mm.
that is that my
Well,
understanding?
it's good, but I would say this that if you miss something in a rak'ah, that means you no longer have a rak'ah. So you have to redo the whole rak'ah.
Got you.
Okay. Yep. That
Got
makes
you. I understand that part now. Now I got what you're saying.
This is why I keep saying obligatory, obligatory. Whatever a rak'ah consists of multiple parts. Parts that are obligatory and parts that are considered sunan, which are not obligatory. We're not talking about the sunan right now. We're talking about what's the minimum that has to be done for this to be considered a rak'ah, a sound rak'ah. Not a perfect rak'ah, not an excellent rak'ah, just a sound basic rak'ah, right? A unit of the prayer. Well, all the obligatory parts have to be in place. If you miss one of those obligatory parts in that rak'ah, you miss one of the obligations overall, which is to have a rak'ah. You don't have a rak'ah because you
Got you.
didn't do everything you had to do that you were supposed to do. So you have to, if you in the salah, if you miss one of the obligations in the rak'ah, it means you don't have a rak'ah. You have to come back and give or perform another rak'ah in order for it to be considered sound. But that's
Got you.
enough. It has to be accompanied by sajda sahu.
Okay. And then so the other part of my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if it's a sunan, just the sajda saha will cover it.
Yes,
I got you. I got you.
yes,
Got you. I got you. We
yes.
yo, we Gucci today. We good.
Yay.
That's why I personally don't like big classes. I'll be honest with you. Because in big classes, the expectation is too much for me anyway.
Mhm.
And it's very difficult to interact with the students. And you can't correct mistakes that are made or whatever. That's a special type of person to kind of work through a big class. The other thing is that's why this is called a study group. It's not really a class. It's a study. We're studying the text. We're trying to make sense of it. We take our time. It's not about getting a grade. It's not about it's about studying the text, right?
Right.
So for me, even though we've covered this material for some time, for me, the fact that you got that piece, I'm very happy. You know what I'm
Oh.
saying? I'm super happy for that because it's like so that because that's a big issue. A lot of people are confused on such and so.
Yeah.
Confused. The other thing is like, for instance, similar to such the sahu is when you're following the imam. That's a whole different discussion.
Mhm.
When how do you correct the imam? Some people they're like Allahu Akbar, bro. There's nothing ever that says that you say Allahu Akbar to correct the imam.
Mhm.
It's Subhanallah. If you say Allahu Akbar, the imam can think that you're making ruku, that you just came into the salah. How is the imam gonna know if he doesn't have, you know, uh, eyes in the back of his head that can
Mhm.
see the back while he's making salah at the same time? That's impossible. That's why that's a silly example. Imams don't have eyes in the back of their head.
Yeah.
So, so the language that's used in the salah is to correct it by the follower. If the imam makes a mistake, the language that's used is Subhanallah.
Mhm.
Okay.
The other issue that comes up is that if, like this is pretty much in the Maliki school, but we already have a way that we do it in the masajid, so you don't have to go against that. If the imam made a mistake and you didn't make a mistake, you don't have to follow the imam in his mistake.
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? So you can sit there and wait for the imam to get into the right position, then you follow him.
Mhm.
But don't you after, like, let's say he's finished the prayer and he fixes it with the
But that's
sajda
what I'm
saha,
saying. That's
you
the
follow
common
him?
way that is done. It's a
Okay.
sound way. It's the common way that you just follow the imam.
Right.
And the imam, you follow the imam in his mistake and his correction. In the Maliki school, you don't. Now, if you do it the Maliki way, Can it cause problems in the masjid? It could, because that's not the way that most people are practicing. But all I'm trying to get by here, or all that I'm trying to communicate, or the only thing that I'm trying to communicate, is when it comes to correcting this law, we're really not clear on how to correct it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
We're not also clear on what are mistakes in this law. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes people think certain things are mistakes when in reality it's just another madhab. You know what I'm saying? But we're not clear on what is core, what's not core.
I'm kind of I hear what you're saying because I'm kind of like even though I did study some Maliki stuff, right? But I'm still got some of the Salafi
And that's fine. That's fine. It's either going to be following kind of like Sheikh al-Albani or the Hanbali school if you studied it correctly. You know
right.
what I'm saying? But the thing about it is, like, it's not, you don't have to throw it away. You always have it in your backpack and you take it out when needed. You know what I'm saying? There's certain things you take out when needed. Um,
Got you.
because it just becomes more in your toolbox to practice. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing wrong there. I mean, don't go with this all this hype that they're completely wrong, and that's too far out there.
Yeah,
That's way too far. No, it's another set of opinions with evidences, and as long as it's studied right, it goes. You know what I'm saying? You just leave it at that way. Nobody except fools in the U.S. are invalidating the fiqh practices that the Salafis have. They may disagree with certain things, but they don't invalidate it. That's some extremist type of stuff to invalidate someone's act of worship if there's a legitimate ijtihad. But if they're only thinking that it's only within the four madhabs the way that they want, a lot of the Maliki stuff that was taught is coming from the Hanbali school. You know what I'm saying? And I don't care if it's from the mainstream position or not the mainstream. It's the Hanbali school. That's their issue. Not it's not gonna. We don't have to get into all those details like that. That's confusion. I know someone who they used to know they used to have the books and all that, and they threw them out. Why throw them out? Just keep them in your library. That's it. It's not another religion, but that's the mindset that people have. You know what I'm saying? Which it has an extremist tendency to it.
right, got you.
There's things like Sifat Salat al-Nabi by Sheikh al-Albani. I taught it, or I attempted to teach it one time. I didn't like the introduction to it. I felt that it was very anti-madhab. But after I went through it and I just kind of put it down with some time, I was like, realize, oh, there's benefit in the book. It may not like certain attitude postures or whatever, but there's benefit in the book. He's showing you things that sometimes in the madhab approach they don't show you, because a madhab most of the times is only going to follow one hadith or two hadith when it comes to certain issues. Except like in the case of the Hanbali school will allow multiple hadith to be operational at the same time. So you can do this way, you can do it that way, you can do that way. Usually, majority of the madhab, the other three schools, they kind of just block you into these practices. Or sometimes they'll say things like "El Amr fihi wasi'," like you know, this is an issue where there's flexibility. Sometimes like Imam Abi Zaid, he'll talk like that. There's flexibility. You know what I'm saying? But sometimes the madhahib will block you into one practice. And so then if it's not good also to just be this is the only way, because now you're missing the flexibility in the deen.
Mm-hmm.
There's flexibility in the deen. You know what I'm saying? And we're removing the flexibility in the deen to say that this is the only way to do it. I don't know if that makes sense or not,
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
But so the madhab, the design of it is just to organize your practice based on evidences and to make sure that you have a clear, sound practice. It's not the only way. It's not the only way to practice. That's the confusion that people have when it comes to following the madhab. And I think like I should probably make a video on that and say it in that way. You
That
know,
would be great.
that's
Yeah.
that's not, the madhab is just a way to ensure you have a sound practice. It's not the only sound practice that exists.
Yeah. You might have to turn off your comments though, because I know somebody's gonna say something crazy.
Yeah, that's fine, but it's for people that are, people that trust that, then that's fine.
But that would be a good clarification because you got other people saying stuff like, watch out for the perennialists, and they'll just make like a blanket statement, and people will run with that. They'll see
But I but I
everything.
don't know how that relates to the madhab, the perennialist comment.
Just going back to things got to be a certain way, and if it's outside of that, then it's not kosher.
Yeah, I mean, you have to realize most of the people that are teaching us have a limited exposure to knowledge. Regardless, if you really go deep, some of these brothers have only studied with two, three sheikhs,
Mhm.
and then they're teaching. You know what I'm saying? If you look at who they studied with, they only studied what they studied, and that's it. And that's part of the dilemma. And you can tell in their discourse, there's no continual development. Because if there was a continual development of knowledge, then you would see it reflected. You know what I'm saying? You would see it reflected. And it's possible that they're just teaching one thing and they have understanding of other things. I'm not going to deny that as a possibility. But from what I've seen of major scholars, majority of what major scholars are saying is not generally reflected in the way that people are teaching. And that's across the board. That's whether it's from the scholars of Saudi or otherwise. Usually, the Hanafi scholars and some Malikis, you find very rigid tendencies among them. And that has to do with the fact that though they're like in environments where it's only that's the only thing that they practice, unless that they're open to other things. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes you'll find in those schools the presentations by some people of those schools that is very rigid. But major scholars don't operate like that. Major scholars don't have issues with these things. They understand that there needs to be some flexibility. They understand that other schools exist, other ways of doing things exist as well. And and as long as they're systematic and studied properly, that's the condition that they put down. Or they say, like is the dominant position in Azhar, which is a very strong usuli position, is that the general person is not obligated to follow a madhab, but they're obligated to follow scholarship. The problem is that in this country, both are not always easily accessible. Has there been progress? Yes. Has there are things a lot easier, but better? Yes. You may have access to the internet, but you may not have someone that's gonna guide you in the process. And that is understands your locality and all that. So that still we have gaps, but we're in a much better place than where we were in 20 years ago. But definitely was
Imam
taught in fiqh
Hussein,
was taught in fiqh is not really reflective of where major fiqh councils are at or scholars are at of really profound, wide, with good breadth and understanding. And a lot of times it's just one way and that's it, which is fine as long as you're humble. But if you're teaching the people this is it and that's it, there's no difference between that and the same the problems that we were facing in Dawah 15 years ago. You're forcing the people to one thing.
Like this one imam posted, Islamic perennialism is to make all beliefs, so long as they are from Muslims, valid. It is a new concept by which no one can consider another Muslim as misguided or blasphemous.
Send me that the WhatsApp, please.
I will.
The problem with that is that the people are not ready to kind of deal with differences of opinion. That's not even where they're at on some of these issues. So some imams, they want to talk about other groups, but not do it in a way that's respectful. And so they open up the door to basically throwing people outside of Islam and creating a culture where it's easy to do that. And then when you try to reverse it and say, no, like relax, what I'm saying? Relax. These people are Muslim and you leave it at that. You don't have to go into all of these details in a point that alienates one Muslim for another. Because most Muslims are just like, Salam alaikum, and they move on. Whatever they hear is what they go with. So we're embroiling the whole community in the conflict between different groups when people actually they're just associating indirectly. They're really not completely committed. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's almost like what the gangs do. They say, if you like the ops, then I put you with the ops. If we catch you on social media liking the post of the ops, we're going to consider you part of the ops. That's kind of what we're doing, and it's not a good approach. Not a good approach at all. May Allah guide us.
I mean, I feel like it just causes a lot of discord and confusion and enmity, and it just makes it really hard to get along with each other.
That's the goal in some cases, though. Some cases that's intentional.